This video is sponsored by World Anvil. How do you make sure your villains still feel active in the story when they're not on screen, or especially when they are hiding in their lair? I don't know if you've ever experienced this problem, but I have, especially when I was first starting out as a game master. I never played a lot of video games growing up, but I definitely absorbed the idea of the boss fight, where the bad guy is just waiting in the final room of the dungeon, biding his time until the heroes come and kill him. This was not helped by the fact that I started running games in 4th edition. Now, I have a lot of really positive things to say about 4th edition as a system, especially from a game master's perspective. But one of the completely valid critiques of that system is that it plays a lot more like a video game than what we typically think of as D&D. And 4th edition especially had a real emphasis on balancing encounters, to the point where a pre-written adventure would actually tell you which specific square an enemy was standing in when the players entered a room and a fight started, because there was a specific design to each encounter that was balanced a certain way based on who's present in the fight when it begins, and who enters later and at what specific scheduled times, or when specific events happen. And when that's the case, we're not really fooling anybody into believing that these are real characters living in a real world, when they're basically pre-programmed to stand in a certain spot and wait for the final fight to happen. But I once heard a piece of advice that really helped me prep my adventures in a way that made the villains feel a lot more real. Imagine what would happen if the heroes never got involved. That's the starting point of your prep. What is the bad guy's plan? What's going to happen if the heroes do nothing? And that had always been percolating in the back of my mind, and sometimes I would implement that advice in some specific ways, and for other games and other sessions, I wouldn't really worry about it as much. It wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but occasionally I might reference it. Because it is a really great piece of design philosophy, but from my perspective, it wasn't the most actionable piece of advice. I couldn't always figure out how to implement it in my games. But I recently started running a Monster of the Week campaign, and that game is very clear. They tell you not to prep an adventure for the heroes to go on with prescribed scenes and events and things like that. No, instead, the game explicitly tells you to only prep what the villains are going to do if the heroes don't get involved. Don't worry about what's going to happen when they do, you'll figure that out on the day. Just figure out what will happen if the heroes are not involved in the story at all. But more importantly, they don't just tell you to do that. They don't just say, think about what your bad guys would do. Okay, cool, that's the advice, go with God. No, this game actually gives you a template you can use, a system that you can fold into your prep. And so even if you're not playing Monster of the Week, you can take these same techniques and apply them to your own games and create villains that are much more proactive in the story.
Oi, matey.
Salty Jack, what are you doing here?
I heard you was looking to plunder some secrets from another role-playing game, and I wanted to let you know that I approve. After all, we should be stealing everything we can. That's the pirate's way.
You know, the last time you showed up, I was much less on board with that. You were literally telling me to promote piracy with my platform, which I wasn't really jazzed about doing. But in this case, I do think it's perfectly fine to just steal mechanics from another game system and drop them into your own game. So if somebody out there plays D&D, or Pathfinder, or Drawsteel, or Daggerheart, or any OSR game, hopefully they can take this game mechanic and use it as part of their prep.
Yo ho ho.
Okay, so let's imagine you're sitting down to prep for your next adventure. First, figure out who your villain is and what they want. And we're going to assume that this is something that is not related to the players or their objectives, because there are obviously exceptions. There are different kinds of adventures you can run that don't really fit into this same format. You can run a heist where the players have to sneak into the monster's lair and steal something. That's what happened with the Kraken in the most recent episode of Critical Role we just talked about. And that's a scenario where the bad guy, or the adversary I guess, doesn't have a plan. They're not trying to do anything, they're just present in the domain. A lot of OSR modules work that way, and that's fine. That's a perfectly valid way to run, and this doesn't always apply to those. On the flip side, you could also run a revenge mission where the monster is directly going after the heroes. That's actually what just happened in the most recent session of Monster of the Week that I just ran. And obviously, that's a little tougher to prep with the idea of, what if the heroes didn't get involved, since by the nature of that mission, the heroes are going to be involved. That adventure is structured around the heroes. I mean, I still think it's important to keep this mindset in mind regardless of your scenario for reasons we'll discuss at the end of the video, but we'll get there. But this approach works especially well for any adventure where the heroes are checking out some sort of supernatural mystery. Goblins are attacking travelers on the King's Road. The residents of the town of Orlane are starting to act very strange. A death curse is sweeping across Faerun. Throughout this year, I've been talking a lot about episodic stories, and I've been especially inspired by Monster of the Week style stories, like TV shows like Buffy or Supernatural. And if you're following that model, then you're most likely designing a scenario that the players are inserting themselves into, rather than a scenario that directly targets the heroes. This game is inspired by stories where the monsters menace innocent people and the hunters get involved and try to save them. And of course, there are always exceptions, like Hellboy is a very Monster of the Week comic, but occasionally there's a comic where the bad guys are coming after him specifically and trying to get something from him, like harvest his red right hand or force him to trigger the end of the world or whatever. But most of the time, it's a procedural. Hellboy shows up in some small town and tries to figure out what kind of monster is running around and how to stop it. Monster of the Week works the same way. This game actually calls each adventure a mystery, which I think tells you a lot about the player's role in the story. They're not victims, they're not MacGuffins, they're not supporting characters, they're not main characters. They're the investigators coming in to figure out what's going on and who needs to be brought to justice. This isn't a story about them. They're outsiders who are ideally not even suspects or victims or involved in any of that until they start inserting themselves into the story. And while this obviously works for games inspired by episodic Freak of the Week TV shows like X-Files or Smallville, I would say this format also lends itself extremely well to Dungeons & Dragons. Now with D&D there are other considerations. For example, you have to think a lot more about plot hooks and answer the question of how you're going to make sure your players care about the current quest. In Monster of the Week, the game really just defaults to altruism as the core goal because those are typically the kinds of heroes you're playing. Even more brooding, loner, damaged characters still want to go out and fight monsters. That is your ultimate goal. But despite all of that, I still think the core principle is the same for lots of D&D adventures. Something weird is going on in this location, this town, or this dungeon, or this country. Go figure out what it is. Oh, it turns out there's some sort of monster or villain or cult trying to do something bad, and you need to go stop them. In short, the bad guys are up to something, the good guys intervene and try to thwart their schemes. So in order to proceed, you need to know the villain's scheme, which is why it's so helpful to also know what will happen if the heroes do nothing. But I don't know about you, but that might be kind of a daunting question, right? After all, it was for me. Like, how much do you prep for what will happen if the heroes don't get involved? When I first heard this advice, probably 10 years ago or so, I went way overboard and tried to figure out how this bad guy could wind up generating future changes in the status quo of the setting and how that could lead to future adventures and really everything that might happen if the players didn't stop the villain. And honestly, that was fun for that first time I did it. I don't regret doing it. I was trying to design an adventure about a major campaign-long bad guy, and so it was only natural for my mind to run away with me to figure out what would happen if the heroes failed or didn't take the bait and how that would impact the campaign overall. But the problem was, every other time I tried to apply this advice to another subsequent adventure where the stakes weren't necessarily as high, it just seemed too daunting. Because if the heroes did nothing, I was trying to figure out how the situation could eventually tie back into future adventures and do all of that prep on the front end. And once again, in the right campaign, that can be fun. I am currently prepping a campaign where the players might have multiple plot hooks for any given adventure, and if they don't take the bait on one of them, I think it is useful to think about how it might come back to bite them later in the campaign. Again, that's a perfectly fine way to explore this idea. But what Monster of the Week showed me is that this is not what this advice has to mean. You don't have to figure out how this will tie back in any future adventures before you even run it, before you know how the heroes are or are not going to get involved. You can just use this as a new format for doing the exact same prep you would do otherwise. It's just a new way to approach the exact same questions you normally would. Because you still need monster stat blocks, you still need important locations and NPCs, all of that is still the same. You're just not trying to create specific scenes or events or encounters that you are hoping happen. Using this approach just allows you to focus your prep on the material you're actually going to need to run your game. Because Monster of the Week offers a template you can use to apply this advice to your games, something called the Mystery Countdown. This is a technique in Monster of the Week where you map out a timeline of 6 events that will play out as part of the monster's machinations. 6 things that will happen if the heroes don't get involved. And you're basically encouraged to think of each step in the countdown as progressively worse things happening, things that the players are encouraged to prevent. And every time they fail to stop one of these things from happening, they have to try to figure out how to stop the next thing, because that will be even worse. And to help reflect the fact that the situation is getting worse, each step of the countdown has a different title. Day, Shadows, Sunset, Dusk, Nightfall, Midnight. This does not have to be a literal timeline. Not everything the villain does have to happen within a single day. But instead the idea is to demonstrate that the situation is going to get worse and worse, darker and darker, more and more monstrous and disastrous if the players don't intervene. So to demonstrate how this works, let's take a look at one of the examples from the book. It's a haunted house story. A family has moved into a house and it turns out it's haunted. There's a ghost whose physical remains are buried in the basement, and she's trying to get the family to dig up her remains and give her a proper burial. So first step, Day. The ghost trapped the family in the house. Step 2, Shadows. The ghost starts scaring them, trying to push them down towards the cellar. In a movie, this would probably be a whole number of scenes, a whole montage, different members of the family getting scared in different ways around the house, and the same might be true for your own game. This is not necessarily one scene or one moment. It might be a whole day's worth of events. Step 3, sunset, though once again, maybe not literally. One of the members of the family, Adam, tries to get a window open, and he's killed by the ghost. You see how with each step, the scenario is getting worse and worse. Now, the ghost has blood on their hands. Step 4, dusk. The ghost tries to get the remaining family members to dig up her remains, but they don't understand what she's trying to communicate to them, so she kills them all. Step 5, nightfall. In another year, the ghost kills 4 squatters who sleep in the house overnight. Step 6, midnight. 5 years later, another family moves in, and the ghost kills them. I think these last 3 steps are so fascinating because they really demonstrate what makes this such an exciting piece of game design, and how you can use it in some really creative ways. Because when I've been running my Monster of the Week games, I've sometimes defaulted to just turning each step of the countdown into a different victim. And if it's a monster that just hunts and eats people like the shark from Jaws, then each step is another dead person, and that works great. And on the flip side, there are some villains where a 6-step evil plan makes perfect sense, because you can easily break down everything they want into 6 discrete, escalating steps. Thanos is trying to get his hands on these 6 Infinity Stones. That's 6 steps. Hans Gruber from Die Hard has an elaborate plot which takes place all in one night and ends with a massacre of several hostages, and you could very easily break that down into 6 steps, and we might just do that later in this video. Even with just a surface level reading of this technique, which is definitely what I had going in, I think this countdown is still really useful and has already helped me prep some terrific adventures throughout my campaign. When I was coming back and writing this script and rereading this example from the book, I realized how much more versatile this tool is than I realized it was, and a lot of the possibilities get revealed in these last 3 steps. First of all, this countdown factors in the actions of NPCs, specifically people who will die because they cannot give the villain what they want, and they cannot solve the problem that the villain has. The family in the house does not understand what the ghost wants them to do. Mr. Takagi from Die Hard does not have the codes that Hans demands from him. Even if they want to help the villain get what they want so they'll leave them alone, they can't. If they could handle it themselves, then there's no reason for the heroes to get involved. Part of a mystery countdown involves making sure that the situation is not just going to work itself out if the heroes do nothing. If they don't get involved or fail to stop the villain's earliest steps, the players do need to see the mystery getting worse and worse and realize that they have to stop it before the situation escalates. Which it is going to do, because that's how the countdown works. The situation is getting worse, and it is going to end in a much worse place than it started. Speaking of the situation getting worse, the second thing that I noticed is that this is not just a process clock. This is not a countdown of, you have this much time before something bad happens. I haven't talked too much about the mechanic of process clocks on this channel. There's something that I know was popularized, possibly invented, but definitely popularized by Blades in the Dark, which is just a system I don't know very well. There are lots of YouTube videos about process clocks. I think there's a really cool idea behind them. That's just a way to make sure the players understand that there's a countdown within the world of the game where they have so much time before something bad happens and they have to stop it. But this is not that. This is a countdown where every step, every signal to the players that they're running out of time, is marked by something new and bad happening. It's not just a ticking clock that lets you know that you have only so much time to solve the problem. It's actually, well,
a countdown of victims that will end at midnight, unless our dear Dark Knight stops me first.
I mean, yeah, basically. But also, no, not necessarily, because this brings me to my third recent observation about this approach. Each new step of the countdown does not need to be a murder. Now, I knew this was true, but I sometimes still felt the obligation to make sure that some of the deaths were spread out. If there's a monster that's killing people, then it kills one person with each step of the countdown. I think they're going to work fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But looking at this example again, as I was working on this script, it's clear to me that you can actually ramp things up even more. You can clump some of the victims together, and then maybe you add more victims with a time jump for the final steps, like we saw in the ghost example. Or maybe instead some of the steps of the countdown don't involve any loss of life, but they're all building up to some other greater tragedy. To see that second idea in action, let's actually take a look at Hans Gruber's plan in Die Hard. Step 1 is to infiltrate the Christmas party. Step 2 is to interrogate Takagi, and that's going to end with Takagi's death because he does not have the information that the bad guys want from him. But the bad guys aren't planning to kill anybody else until the end of the night. Steps 3 through 5 are hacking into the vaults and planting C4 below the roof, fending off the police. Okay, some cops probably do die when they blow up the armored cop car. That's fair, that's certainly an escalation. But for step 5, the FBI shuts down the building's power and Hans gets access to the vault. He gets what he wanted, but he still has to get out of the vault. So step 6 is blowing up all the hostages so he can escape from the building scot-free. And you can run the same exercise at home. Take a story you really enjoy and see if the villain's plot can be broken down into 6 steps, most of which escalate the situation. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. 7 Evil X's, 6 comic books, 6 big fights, 6 steps. John Doe in 7. 7 victims, but only 6 separate incidents. no spoilers, but it does make sense. Even an episode of a Freak of the Week TV show, like the ones this game is based on, they always had 5 acts plus a teaser, so those come built in with a 6-step countdown. Now, when I'm prepping my Monster of the Week campaign and I'm creating my villains and setting up my mystery countdowns, one of the most helpful tools for me is actually today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a fantastic online toolkit that you can use to create all the information about your world and collect it and share it with your players. You can make different articles for NPCs, monsters, factions, locations, monsters, gods, legends, myths, monsters, and so much more. And I actually do this for my Monster of the Week campaign. I create articles dedicated to each monster, as well as the important NPCs the players interact with. Then I can send these articles to my players so they can see the art or the actors that I think best represent these characters. Especially since this game is so heavily inspired by TV shows like Buffy and Supernatural, it's a really fun exercise to cast these characters as if I was creating a TV show, with the benefit of not being limited by an actor's actual availability. And then I can actually send those to my players so they get a perfect mental snapshot of these characters. Additionally, I can actually hide secrets in these articles that my players can't see. So we can both have the same document open, but I can click on a separate tab and take a look at the secrets I've come up with. And that's a really handy way to keep track of my prep and all of my notes. It really helps a lot. And of course, World Anvil has a Chronicles feature, so I can actually keep track of multiple different timelines in the same campaign. So I can actually make a timeline for my villains and their evil schemes. And that's something I'm going to be doing a lot with some future villains, especially with some upcoming campaigns I'm getting ready to run, where the villains will have much longer running plans. The World Anvil Chronicles feature and the timelines within will be an incredibly useful way to keep track of those. I'm already starting to map out some evil schemes for some future adventures and campaigns, and World Anvil's Chronicles feature is enormously helpful for building those timelines. And if you want to see me prep my campaign using World Anvil, I have done some live streams using the website, and I'm definitely going to be doing more in the next month or so, so keep your eyes out for those. That will be a great way for you to see how I actually use this site to prep my own actual games. And World Anvil is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off if you use this code. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Now, when I was working on this script and rereading this section in the book about mystery countdowns, and I was really thinking about how you can apply this advice to your own games, the final observation I had is how this makes your prep so much more simple. Definitely easier than I was making it when I was originally trying to follow this advice. Like I said, I'd been mapping out specific moments in the calendar, the dates where NPCs would get involved with the story, and where it would spread and its influence would expand. And I think that can be fun depending on the campaign and the evil plot in question, when you're dealing with a big evil conspiracy or a major big bad working on something behind the scenes. I think that's perfectly reasonable, especially if they have a specific time frame for what they're trying to do. Like, they have to perform a ritual by a certain time on the calendar. Or I have an idea for a Batman campaign that I want to run, and there's a specific Joker story that I would love to include where specific things would happen on specific days. And so, yeah, that would be the kind of thing you would put on the timeline. But the problem with putting in all that work is if the players do get involved, suddenly the entire timeline gets thrown out. After all, in the example I just read from the book where there's a ghost in the haunted house, this is the final paragraph of that section. This is all the stuff that will happen if the hunters never came. I expect with the hunters present, they'll be trapped in the house as well as, or instead of, the family. After that, I'm not sure how it will go. We'll find out when we play. This is why it's so important to keep your prep simple, which is what this rubric helps you do, because you don't know what's actually going to happen when your heroes get involved in the plot. Again, look at the Thanos example. Step 1, get the Power Stone from the Nova Corps. Step 2, get the Space Stone from the Asgardians. Step 3 is to send your minions to Earth to get the Mind Stone and the Time Stone. If you've seen the movie, you know that the minions fail at that task. But meanwhile, Thanos goes on to Step 4, get the Reality Stone from the Collector, and then Step 5, use Gamora to get the Soul Stone. And then Step 6 is to come back to Titan, get the 2 remaining stones from your minions, and snap your fingers and eliminate half of all life in the universe. Well, he gets to Step 6 in the movie, he gets to Titan to get the last 2 stones, but he finds out that Step 3 has not happened yet. The Time Stone is on Titan, but it's still being wielded by its protector, and his other minions are still trying to get the Mind Stone in Wakanda. So at this point, Thanos has to improvise. Honestly, I'm glad the book mentions that even Step 1 of this countdown might not happen if the players get trapped in the haunted house instead of the family. And certainly if they're trapped alongside the family, then only Step 1 will probably happen the way it's written out, and the rest of the countdown is totally up in the air. Like, yes, you'll still get the scares in Step 2 probably, but it will probably more be focused on the players as well, and definitely you hope that Step 3 is not going to happen where one person gets murdered, but you don't know. We don't know what will happen at that point. But if the players can't prevent Step 1, then you can use all these other steps to ramp up the tension as the heroes try to get in the house because they're stuck outside as the situation is getting more and more dire within the building. And that's the value of this approach. It helps you put enough energy into your prep so you know what's going to happen if the heroes do nothing, but not so much energy into your prep that you're going to be frustrated if the heroes start derailing your plans and you start having all this material that you prepared for that you're not going to end up using. It honestly feels like this approach to prep is kind of designed to prevent railroading. I mean, after all, let's be honest, if everything you expect to happen in the next session boils down to just 6 sentences, then you're not going to cling as tightly to those events. Instead, you're doing your prep with the knowledge that it might all get thrown out, and in fact, that's what you're hoping is going to happen. You probably don't want to get to the end of the mystery countdown because that would be very bad. It would mean a lot of people died. You want the heroes to get involved, and you also want them to do it in a surprising way rather than prescribing exactly how they disrupt the villain's evil scheme. This mechanic does a really nice job of helping me keep that approach in mind when I prep and run my games. And a nice side effect of that is that this keeps the players in the driver's seat and makes sure that whatever happens is their story. Rather than forcing them to follow your agenda, you're instead always going to be honoring their choices throughout the adventure. And this brings me to my final point. See, I was a little worried that running a game modeled after a TV show might mean I'm always making really dramatic things happen, whether or not they've been properly set up. That was the experience I had when I tried to run the Avatar RPG. I felt like the pre-written adventure was structured more around generating dramatic beats rather than internal consistency. Although, I also wonder how much of that is me not fully understanding what they were going for. I don't know if it was a communication problem or it really is a design choice that I'm not sure I'm wild about. I want to give that system another shot, but that's a topic for another day. But actually, in practice, using a mystery countdown has made me more of a simulationist game master, because you're not improvising anything to make the scenario more dramatic. Instead, you're prepping all the different parts of this adventure, all the monsters and minions and NPCs and magic items, but you're just not trying to force any specific scenes to happen. And this has actually completely changed my approach to certain aspects of my games, including when I use the same approach in D&D games. For example, when I'm running D&D, I'll often spend a lot of time trying to cultivate a specific experience for my players, making sure that a combat encounter goes exactly the way I hoped it would, because I had a reason that I wanted to go a certain way, and it's usually because I wanted the players to have a specific outcome or experience. But when I focus instead on what's going to happen if the heroes do nothing, then that means I'm not factoring in exactly what the heroes are going to do in advance, which means they can do whatever they want to. They can surprise me with how they're going to interact with the story and when and how they fight certain monsters, which means the monsters are just the monsters. They're as powerful as they're going to be. I don't have to put my thumb on the scale to try to customize them for a specific scene so they have a specific effect on the story. The monsters just exist, and the players can interact with them however they want to, and there have to be consequences for the players biting off more than they can chew or attacking a monster without doing proper research. There still have to be warnings and foreshadowing. You still have to play fair. That hasn't changed. But this approach actually gives me an opportunity to kick some other bad habits where I might try to hold onto the story too tightly rather than letting the scenario play out the way it actually would. Again, this is not a new concept. This is not the first time anybody's ever had the thought of, maybe you should just imagine what the monsters would do rather than force something to happen. I'm not breaking new ground here, but this is the method that helped me unlock how to actually change my style of prep and figure out how to bring some of these ideas to my table in a way that I just hadn't cracked before, because I actually managed to focus my prep on a new approach, and that helps me get the outcome I want. When I'm trying to run a specific story and make the events play out a certain way, I might occasionally pull a dirty trick out of my ass to make it seem like the bad guy is as clever as I wanted him to be. But if instead I prep a scenario with no focus on what the heroes will do, if I'm not trying to craft scenes for them, then I can just put as much prep into the villain as I want to, and if he does have certain resources, then cool, that's how he'll solve a problem like the players. But if my heroes genuinely outsmart him, well, that's fun too. Now I have to figure out how he'd respond, and this turns my villains into much more active characters. I'll be honest, in most of my Monster of the Week games, we have never made it past step 3 of the mystery countdown. Most of the time my players get involved before we even hit step 2. But that does not mean that we're always running really short adventures. Instead, it just means that the players get involved early enough that I don't need to use the countdown after that point. Once the heroes get involved, the monster might still be trying to hit certain beats on the countdown, but I'm not trying to force them to happen. I'm just trusting that the story has enough narrative inertia that it will lead to some really interesting outcomes. Each of those adventures has been still so much fun, even though we aren't going through every step of the countdown that I prepped. And a big part of that is because of the way you prep adventures in this game. And weirdly, I think the perfect example of what this can look like already exists, and it's in the Whitestone arc of the Vox Machina campaign. In that spectacular season of Critical Role, we don't know every step of the Briarwood's evil plan, but we know that step 1 is to brainwash Sovereign Uriel, and step 6 is to perform the ritual for Vecna on Winter's Crest. But we don't know every step in between, and it's likely Matt Mercer did not map out 6 discrete steps, because why would it happen to be 6? That doesn't make any sense for our purposes. But also, the moment Vox Machina gets involved in the story, we see the Briarwoods have to start improvising, and that's when things get really juicy. Our heroes capture the Briarwoods coachman, Desmond, so Delilah summons an invisible stalker to assassinate him in their jail cell. Our heroes enter Castle Whitestone, so one of the villain's minions, Professor Anders, takes Cassandra DeRollo hostage and waits for the heroes to arrive so he can slit her throat in front of them. And of course, the most iconic Briarwood moment, and one of the most iconic Critical Role moments of all time, is when the Briarwoods kill some commoners, dress them as Vox Machina, and hang them in effigy from the Sun Tree. It is like the quintessential example of a villain doing something they never would have had to do if the heroes didn't get involved, and it unambiguously made the adventure so much stronger and more memorable. Now, this is naturally going to change the pacing of your storytelling. Like, we are still getting big, epic fights with the bad guy, but they're just not necessarily happening at step 6 of the countdown. But the funny thing is that in my Monster of the Week campaign, I think the fights are getting more and more exciting as the campaign goes on, and that's partially because the players are often choosing the time and place for a fight, and they're going to make some really interesting choices that I might not have thought of. But also, in fairness, combat in Monster of the Week is just totally different from combat in D&D, and so that has forced me to adapt my approach to these encounters. In fact, that's another lesson I've taken from this game that has been really helpful for all of my gaming, including games of D&D and every other system that I've been playing. And we're going to talk more about that next time.
Oh, you mean to tell me that we're stealing even more from this game?
Yeah, I guess. I don't really consider it stealing. I just think it's normal and cool to find cool things in the games we like and fold them into the other games we also like. Some members of my audience might really want to play Monster of the Week, but others might not, and that's okay. But just because they might not play this system doesn't mean they should miss out on what I think is a really cool piece of game design that could help a lot of us.
Ah, so you're not stealing these lessons? They're more like buried treasure to discover.
Sure, if you like.
Then bring me a treasure map.
Okay. Here. The rulebook is the treasure map.
That was so cheesy.
See you next episode. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell and hype the video. I don't know what that is. It's a new thing and I have no idea what it does, but if it helps, please do it. That would be nice. Consider joining my Patreon and helping make sure these videos come out a little more frequently. This one is a little tricky. This one may not have gotten any faster in any meaningful way. There's nothing you could have done because I've actually filmed this video 3 times. The first time I went back and listened to it and the audio did not come through properly. The second time I went through it, I filmed the entire video, and I realized it was like an hour long, and I did not feel this topic justified being an hour long. I felt like we could get in and get out relatively quickly, at least by my standards. And so I rewrote the entire script, and then I just have not had a chance to film it because it has been so hot, and it has just not been reasonable to try to find a time that I could film. My child has also been really under the weather this week, which is natural. It happens. And now he has like red spots all over him. So we like called the doctor and was like, "What's going on?" And he explained it was probably just a virus. It's nothing major, but you know, it's RFK is America, so we gotta make sure it's not measles or something like that. But all to say, it's been a wild and hectic couple of weeks, but now things should be a little more settled down now, and I feel like this version of the script is a lot stronger than the first version that I wrote, and that I filmed twice, actually. Yeah, that's cool. Also, in the past week or 2 weeks, I actually ran some paid games. I ran a paid Shadow Dark game. I ran the Marvel role-playing game, the Batman role-playing game, and Daggerheart. From those last 3 for the first time. I've done a lot of Shadow Dark before, but those other ones were all new for me. And if you missed those, or the time zones didn't work, or anything like that, stay tuned. I do want to do more of this in the future, probably in like early to mid-September. So keep your eyes open for that. In the meantime, make sure to watch this video right here. It is all about keeping characters central to the campaign, which was a pretty key element of this video, so I think it's a nice companion to this one. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.